Hello everyone, this is Dark Journalist. Tonight I have a special episode for you as we welcome back Oxford scholar and Giza Death Star book series author, Dr. Joseph Farrell. Today, Dr. Farrell will go deep on the wave of UFO shootdowns and the false narratives put out by NORAD and the Biden administration about their unusual response. He'll also look at the development of the UFO threat narrative as a prelude to the enactment of emergency powers and activation of continuity of government. Please join us now. Joseph, it's great to have you back.
Thanks for having me, Daniel.
What an interesting time for you to come back.
You think?
We started with balloons.
Balloons, yes.
Then we got objects, cylindrical objects.
And now we have objects, yes.
And half the size of, kind of a compact car, basically.
And we don't know where they're coming from. So they say.
So they say. There's a number of interesting high-profile people coming out of the woodwork, like the COG commander, for example. VanHerck, General VanHerck, the NORTHCOM COG and NORAD commander. There's a triple play.
And for the record, let's just remember who warned us about these people appearing all of a sudden in what's going on now. Why, you did. As much as 3 days ago, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm counting correctly. So surprise, folks. Put that down in a prediction comes true columns.
Yes. COG is always on schedule, right?
Yep, exactly.
VanHerck is interesting, Joseph, right off the bat because he served in the 509th Bomber Squadron.
Oh, fancy that.
I go back to Roswell on the Reich, your famous book, Notorious, around the UFO file and the strangeness of the traditional Roswell story versus the alternate one that you put forward. The significance of the COG commander being in charge of this bomber squadron. What do you think of the connection of the fact that Jesse Marcel, back in 1947, when he discovered all this wreckage, was the intelligence officer for the 509th. How about that lineage generations later? And here we have VanHerck.
Well, for me, Daniel, the problem with the Roswell story, as ufology understands it, is that they've compressed the whole thing, so that you're always having to deal with the later additions to the story. The story, as it originally unfolded, was Jesse Marcel finds strange debris. Mm-hmm. Newspaper article is run in the Roswell Daily Record that the Air Force recovered a crashed saucer. They load the debris up on a B-29 or some sort of bomber and fly it to Fort Worth along with Major Marcel. Marcel is then, a photograph is taken of him holding some weather balloon wreckage.
Right.
And that's the end of the story. The bodies and all of that stuff come years after the original story. And this is why I'm very suspicious of that addition.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at Major Marcel and what he actually says, he talks about the memory metal, he talks about the hieroglyphics, and even diagrammed them at one point during his career under hypnosis. And to me, they look like quantum electron projection states. In other words, the diagrams can be rationalized if you look at what he drew and compare them to certain things in quantum mechanics. That's the story. So in the way that I look at it, Daniel, the government steps in and deliberately creates what I call the Roswell dialectic. It's either a weather balloon or it's extraterrestrial technology. There's no middle ground.
Right.
And they've locked the perception of the story into that dialectic. And that to me is classic continuity of government operation. Mm. If you need to spin a story especially one with implications like that, you've got to get a handle on the perception right away. And to me, that's COG right away. And the other thing we need to remember about Roswell is that Truman creates the national security state, in my opinion, partially, not completely, but at least partially motivated by the Roswell incident. And it's Truman, of course, during the UFO flap of 1952, who goes on to issue the shoot down order. So again, you've got a continuity of government type of presence in all of this stuff going on. That's the way I look at it.
Interesting. That link of the continuity program with the UFO file, this is a crucial link that's missed.
Oh, I think so. I think the presentations that you've been doing on this are spot on. I can't see how you'd be planning a continuity of government operation in the case of a nuclear war with the Warsaw Pact and not include in your scenario planning and your gaming of scenarios, and not include a continuity of government plan for the possibility of an alien invasion. I can't see why you would not do that. And in fact, you look at my books, the Covert War series of books. If you go back to what I said, you've got a threefold strategic problem at the end of World War II. If you're the deep state in this country, you've got the communists, there's Nazis out there and they're doing something, and then you've got a UFO problem. Right. So whatever continuity of government operation that you put into place, from the outset, it has to be dealing with those three things. So the UFO file absolutely is a part of it from the start.
Exactly. Well, the emergency planning around the UFO file, especially when they become aware of the technical prowess of these things, instantly, Sarbarker, who was the leading physicist, went on the record in 1950 and said, this is a top secret above the atomic bomb.
Above the hydrogen bomb, is what he said. Wow. Yeah, above the high, which, that was about as high as you could get. Yeah. Absolutely.
So what does that tell us?
Well, that tells us, number one, that they know something. Right. That they know something they're not telling us, that they're looking at these things, they're studying these things, and perhaps they have some idea as to where this technology might be coming from. If all my Nazi research is to be credited with any grain of truth, then they're at least suspecting that in part is responsible for it. And I stress in part. And every indication, I've gone out of my way in my books to demonstrate that, yes, they were suspecting at least that. Alfred Leding, the fellow that I talk about at Wright-Patterson Air Base in the Covert War books, Leding himself initially suspected that this is a Nazi technology of some sort, that because it resembles the stuff that we know about. But Leding went on to state that he did not believe that all of this could be coming from that source, simply because of the sheer numbers of UFO reports, number one. And number two, and this is something that people forget, of the sheer difficulty that human technology at that time had in engineering those kinds of things, and doing so with a kind of financial and economic efficiency. So in other words, to engineer all this stuff simply on the basis of Nazi technology would have cost an arm and a leg. Right. And no one had that kind of money. No one had that kind of infrastructure to be producing these mass numbers. So Leding was the one Air Force expert that I've been able to track down that was willing to go to the Nazi angle, and then, in addition to that, to say, but you cannot use that angle to account for all of this stuff.
Oh.
He's a very interesting fellow.
This is an important distinction that you make, which is you have to consider this advanced technology coming out of the Nazi regime at the end of the war and it being imported or exported out to Argentina and other places.
Right.
Especially some of the more advanced programs they did at the end with Hans Kammler.
Right. Right.
And the Bell aspect and all the rest of it. And not to mention the fact that some UFOs look like versions of the Nazi Bell.
Right, they do. The Kecksburg UFO is the classic case in point. And I think, I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but I think I'm probably the first one out there in the alternative community that connected the Bell story to the Kecksburg story.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
But there's all sorts of other stuff that's going on. There's similar objects or devices reported inside the Soviet Union, and on we go. The real problem is these things, in my opinion, and I agree with Lading, the real problem is these things are so costly and expensive and require an enormous amount of man hours to build, and the investment represented is way beyond, numerically, there's just too many of these reports to be accounted for by an isolated technology that is being, developed in super secret installations in, 3 or 4 places in the world. That's the problem here.
Absolutely. We have a big Roswell signature with these events through the presence of General VanHerck.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me also that the Space Force commander, Chance Saltzman, that his big string, his decade of work in his background was at Malmstrom, which is, kind of near where the balloon came over, it set off all this action. Now, we're going to flip between 47 and 23.
Okay.
A lot here. So we're going to go into the 23 part. Now, when we look at things hanging out in our airspace that get covered, there have been things over the years like Skylab is coming, it's going to fall down out of space. And but the hyper awareness, let's say, especially since 9/11, but far before it, as we know, of space in a nuclear era where most of that would be fought with missiles in space, and we have bombers in the airspace around the United States. The idea that something could get through and we wouldn't be aware of it is a total fallacy. And yet that is what NORAD is saying that we had in a domain awareness gap. For balloons.
Balloons.
So, we've got World War II Japanese balloons coming across. What do you think of that? I mean, what are they trying to accomplish by dumbing the public down that much?
Daniel, I honestly don't know. I mean, do they take us all for fools?
Yes.
Number one, here's my problem with this whole balloon nonsense. And I have no problem that the Chinese or Mexico or Ecuador might be launching all sorts of balloons to spy on us.
But coffee espionage going on.
Yeah, but you talk about a half-assed platform for conducting, electronic surveillance is what we're being told this was all for.
Right.
Well, for my word, the Chinese have satellites up there that can do any job that any balloon can do, and probably do it much more effectively and efficiently. And in spite of that, the balloon is still going to have to transmit whatever it's finding out to the satellite to get.
That's right.
It's just, I'm dumbfounded that they expect us to buy this.
It's incredible.
And then now all of a sudden there's more balloons that somebody's launching. Who knows who it is. And now all of a sudden they're objects, and we don't know who's sending them, and so we're shooting them down. And here's the other part of the story that just frosts me, Daniel. I mean, you can see the icicles of anger forming on me as we're contemplating this. I saw one article where they shot down the balloon in the object in Alaska with a Sidewinder missile. And the article goes on to note that this is a missile that's been in service since about the mid 1950s.
Good old
that,
Sidewinder.
yeah, that may be true, but I'm thinking, my word, we are no further along after all the trillions of dollars we've lavished on the pentagram than 1950s air-to-air Sidewinder missiles
Right.
on an airplane that has gone way over budget and doesn't work. And
Well, it was a
now,
domain awareness gap.
yeah, it's a domain awareness gap. We have to, by God, it's the Confederacy back,
We know those Confederate balloons coming
those
up.
Confederate balloons, just Daniel, I'm absolutely, I'm dumbfounded. I've been sitting here watching this whole thing with the balloons, and I'm just laughing. Because number one, the idea that they don't know where they're coming from.
Mm.
I want to know what kind of balloons these are. I grew up in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Okay, there was a company in Sioux Falls at the time called Raven Industries. I could take you to the building. It's still there in Sioux Falls. I could take you to their building. And do you know what they made? They made weather balloons.
Interesting.
That was their whole business. And they made the packages that they put on the weather balloons and so on and so forth. And, I remember as a boy reading about stories where they would notify, if there was local launch of a weather balloon, they would notify the FAA and the FCC and, all these different agencies that they had to notify to track the balloon. And we've been dealing with balloon explanations of the UFO since Roswell and the Mantell case in Ohio and so on and so forth. Yeah. So to me, this is nothing new. What's new here, Daniel, is how they're dusting it off. And instead of creating a Roswell dialectic, now they're saying we don't know who the owners are and who's launching these things, and we can only call them objects because that's as much as we know about them. Bull roar.
Mm.
There's a little thing called gun camera footage.
Right.
Yeah.
So, for starters, yeah.
For starters, this whole thing, Daniel, is to me has all the hallmarks of an op. And I'll go so far as to say that aspects of this thing have the feel of exercises or drills.
Mm-hmm. Drills.
Yeah, drills. If there's a domain awareness problem, then we're finding out via these things that we've got a blind spot in our air defense system.
Right.
We could be bombed into oblivion by World War II Japanese Fugo paper balloons at any minute now.
Right, yeah.
we have to defend ourselves against those treacherous Orientals and their balloons.
This is the extraordinary thing that they came out with the announcement today after this unusual briefing where everyone came out looking freaked out. And VanHerck makes this announcement. He says, well, we reset our sensors, so now we can see everything again, and we're going to be observing these, so it won't be a problem in the future because, we just tweak those sensors and we're all set.
We're all set. All we had to do is turn the dial. Yeah.
So, before we were subject to nuclear attack and all this other stuff for years, but thank God nothing happened. We just tweaked that dial and now we're all set.
We just turned the dial and now we're all, this has all, I'm sorry, Daniel, this has all the feel to me of narrative preparation.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like to me.
And now let's watch that narrative.
And now let's watch the narrative. First of all, let's go scare some idiots in Congress, okay?
Right.
And get everybody from Marco Rubio to Chuck Schumer, panicked and hitting their bourbon,
Rubio's like, quick, let's bomb Iran.
Yeah, let's take a bubble bath. Anyway, I just... it's just this, it is so much theater so far to me. I can't I can't believe that people are taking this seriously.
Mm,
That's what bothers me. You've got clowns in charge, and they're willing to risk nuclear war for the Ukraine. You know,
right, right. Um, that's very interesting too. There was a report, of course, where a Russian news agency said before all this happened, they said, we
hmm
shot down a UFO.
hmm yeah,
And I thought, oh, they're going to start using the term as a way to raise the stakes. Like,
yeah,
we know what you have, we know what we have. How would you like it if we started talking about it?
yeah,
So it felt like one of those, as you've said, the blackmail games that go on in
yeah,
the background
yeah.
about what they know versus what we know. My question about this and what we're seeing is that the person out there explaining it is not President Biden,
Uh-huh.
but it is VanHerck, who is the continuity of government combatant commander who would take
Mhm.
over in a UFO emergency.
Right.
Instantly, the newspapers of the world stopped using UAP and used UFO for all those headlines. I guess the keyword didn't stick with UAP. But what gets me is they've gone into speaking about this and saying, well, the other three objects, we don't know. We can't obtain the debris. The first thing, yes, it was a Chinese balloon, but we don't believe the other three were, leaving
Mhm.
open the question. So you get this New York Times reporter, Helene Cooper, who was the one, along with Leslie Kean, who launched the Lou Elizondo operation
Right.
in the New York Times article in 2017. And she goes forward in that press conference and she gets that special moment with VanHerck and she says, do you think it could be alien?
Mhm.
And VanHerck looks at her and says, I'm not ruling anything out.
Mhm.
And that's
Mhm.
the headline that gets picked up everywhere before it all gets knocked down by the
Right.
officials. What are they floating there? And why did they leave that in the air for 48 hours?
Precisely, I think, as narrative preparation.
Right.
To me, I think they are carefully prepping the narrative. After all, nothing else has worked.
Mm.
They we're past the asteroid stage.
Yes.
Remember that. If you're familiar with Carol Rosen's affidavit, it was
Oh, yeah.
communists, then nations of concern, terrorists, asteroids, ET. Well, we're way past the asteroid stage, and now we're into the ET stage. So I think they're prepping the narrative. Um, I go back to things like Norm Berggren's Ringmakers of Saturn and that whole undercurrent within alternative research, Daniel, that was pointing out there's something weird going on out there.
Mhm.
And I fully expect that in the next few years, they're going to ratchet up this aspect of things to an enormous degree. Uh,
This is like the dry run for it.
this is yes, this is the overture. Again, I think we're in the overture. The curtain's not gone up on the opera, and they're prepping the ground. And if you look back on what they've been doing, they've been prepping this ground for a long time. The Elizondo business,
Mhm.
the To the Stars Academy business, all of this stuff, and they've
Yeah.
they've decided at some point, I think about 10 years ago, to change up the game because they're no longer in absolute denial mode.
Right. That's a big
Um,
change.
that's a huge change. But again, this has all been controlled. It's all been controlled. My suspicion is, since we're talking about this, my suspicion is this is their fallback position. In other words, something has them spooked and they don't want to lose control of the narrative.
Mm.
So this is their way to maintain control of that whole narrative. But something out there or deep in the ocean somewhere has them spooked. And this is their effort to maintain control. Uh when that something reveals itself, I think everybody's going to know it because
Yeah.
the standard tools of controlling the narrative aren't going to work anymore. They just won't.
Well, you've raised this before about how the whole game changes if you are doing a UFO psyop, a
Right.
threat psyop, and the real thing shows up.
Shows up.
Yeah,
Right.
then what?
Well, then you have to figure out, okay, if the real thing shows up, or several versions of it, if the real thing shows up, is it on our side or not? Is it good or not?
Right.
Or is there more than one side that's going to show up? Is some of them good and some of them bad?
Yes.
And you know me, I've been trying to point out that we've been in this cosmic war for a very long time, and that means there's good guys out there and there's bad guys out there. So you better be able to figure out who's who
Hmm.
and do so in a hurry. Um, the the thing that I think they're about now is they are carefully trying to assert control of the narrative.
Mhm.
And here's my problem, and it's the same problem I had, Daniel, with Truman's shoot down order in 1952. Harry Truman, whatever you think about him, is not going to risk starting an interplanetary war.
Right.
So when he issues a shoot down order, he already has enough intelligence about what the Air Force thinks they're dealing with. The same, I think, applies here. I don't think a shoot down order would have been issued if they were convinced that they were dealing with something extraterrestrial and ipso facto more advanced than us. They would issue a shoot down order if they thought they were dealing with extraterrestrials on more or less the same technology level as we. Yes, they would
Mhm.
do that. So in other words, the shoot down to me says the fact that they're telling us we don't know what they are or where they're coming from, I'm not buying it. The shoot down order says they know something and they're still covering that up.
Interesting. And what have they learned in those 70 years between
Precisely.
the 52 shoot down order and this
Precisely.
2023 dry run?
Precisely.
Um, it's interesting to me that just previous to this,
Uh-huh.
we had the huge runaround of the classified documents everywhere.
Yeah, I know.
They Trump raid at Mar-a-Lago, then suddenly it's Biden himself, and it's
Uh-huh.
Pence. They all have
Uh-huh.
classified information, and they're all getting raided by the FBI out of nowhere.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
then in the middle of that, there's a false CIA JFK story that comes out that, oh, we're going to be able to get those records. There's a lawsuit. We're getting it. And the media does float on that story, but there are, in fact, no records that are released that are pertinent to the CIA's role in the assassination. And they intentionally, leave those records out,
Right.
as we know. So the JFK records also become interesting in that whole classified information run. What was going on in that run just before we got the weird objects?
Well, believe me, I share your intuition that the timing of both events is rather weird.
Yeah.
And I share your intuition that there may be some connection between these classified documents and this current unidentified object shoot down flap.
Exactly.
Um, if it is the case that there is a connection, then my guess is they are scrambling to get the documents for possibly one of two reasons. Either the documents reveal the extent of their knowledge that they want to keep covered up, or and you have to stop and just ponder that for a minute, because if they're going to put out a narrative, the documents secondly might be a means of shredding that narrative or disproving it.
Hmm.
So in other words, if the two things are connected, they're going around trying to get all of this stuff back under one very secure file and put it under lock and key, because whatever's in those documents may reveal the fact that they are, they're trying to create a narrative.
Right.
That to me would be the way to connect the two events. The only part of me that has difficulty with that scenario, Daniel, is I can understand giving that information to a Donald Trump or to a Mike Pence or a Barack Obama or a Bill Clinton or a Hillary Clinton.
Mm-hmm.
But giving it to someone as inordinately corrupt, incompetent, and utterly stupid as Joe Biden, that I can't understand.
Oh my God.
And if Biden somehow got his hands on that stuff, then yeah, I'd be running around as fast as I could before he sells it all to China. This all began with the Chinese balloon. So, who knows where it ends.
Do you think it's possible that Biden raided himself?
Oh, sure I do.
Yeah.
Sure I do. There are aspects of that whole story that from the very beginning struck me that way.
Yes.
It's as if he had a memory lapse, and then also, oh my word, I've got all those documents in my Corvette. What if the FBI finds them before I give them back to there are aspects of it that have that quality to it, in my opinion. So yeah, I wouldn't be a bit surprised. I put nothing past these people.
Absolutely. Well, the dots that I see around this have something to do with the Hunter Biden laptop and all the national security officials saying it's not real, it's Russian disinfo. So no matter what's on it, you won't believe it.
Right.
That was before the election
of
2020, in which they promoted Biden over Trump. What's interesting is we know that Twitter stopped the New York Post from publishing that on their, and froze their entire account. And this was a huge red line in free speech. And that's how you got, Musk grandstanding saying, I'm the free speech captain. Mm-hmm. But it is interesting to me because I wonder if it wasn't on that laptop that we got this original problem of the UFO threat psyop being there in some kind of form that somebody could get their hands on tangibly. And then you go to Mar-a-Lago and the raid is, can we find that here? Right. And, the strange things of them looking through Melania's clothing and things of this nature lets you know it's no ordinary raid.
Yeah, I again, that makes perfect sense to me. I wouldn't be a bit surprised that there are, let's put it this way, we've all seen or heard about the salacious stuff on Hunter's laptop. Okay. And for the life of me, Daniel, I can't help but view that as kind of the final level of distraction.
Yes.
In other words, there's something on that laptop that they want nobody to know.
Yes.
And I strongly suspect that it could include things like aspects of the UFO problem. I strongly suspect that it would include things on their business arrangements with the Ukraine. It might even include information or details about the Maidan coup in the Ukraine. Who knows? But there's something in it, and I wouldn't be a bit surprised if there's some sort of UFO connection in there too.
Interesting. Yeah.
Given the level of Hillary Clinton's interest in 2016 and John Podesta's involvement in all of that stuff, I would not be a bit surprised. They, as far as I can tell, they were trying to make Hillary Clinton the disclosure president. And Trump came along and knocked all of that into a cocked hat. And now I think we're seeing the backup plan.
Yes. Wow. That's really interesting. Hillary was a shoo-in for that. Trump did the big upset.
Yep.
And Trump comes in with a very large UFO background of his own
Oh yeah,
through John
absolutely. He did.
Trump.
Oh yeah. Well, not only
Um,
through John Trump, but through Roy Cohn.
yes, right, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think of DISC and you think of, the control of the
Right.
UFO file over time, that leak there in the Torbit document in 1970 is about as significant as, something like the Pentagon Papers, just
Right.
absolute changing the face of the thing. And Cohn is right in the middle of it.
Cohn is right in the middle of it, and that places Donald Trump right in the middle of it, and Donald Trump's right in the middle of something else.
Mhm,
The whole Kennedy assassination. He's, for crying out loud, he is a very close friend of John Kennedy Jr.
mhm.
Now, you don't have to buy all the stuff that they've been saying about the two of them since that time. The fact of the matter is they were very close friends.
Right.
So, there's that aspect of things going on as well.
Mhm.
And Trump's involvement with the UFO file, that's yet a third. So again, I think if there's any, I think your intuitions are sound. If there's one story that's connecting all of this
Mhm.
strangeness that we're seeing, it's got something to do with UFOs.
Right.
And we're scratching around trying to figure out, well, what is it that they're in such a big hurry to conceal, and why now are, after decades of denial of the UFO story, why is it that now we're shooting them down and then discussing through the continuity of government chief the idea that, well, maybe they are aliens, who knows,
Yeah, right.
uh
Um,
it's
but
just
that's an
not.
amazing thing for VanHerck to be
Yeah, it
saying
is.
under any
Well,
circumstances.
remember General Milley
Yes.
at the Air Force Academy. Well, you got to train yourself to be fighting little green men.
Right.
And,
Exactly.
okay. And then they come out later and say, well, he was really talking about Russian camouflage uniforms. Come on. Jeez.
They treat you like a 7-year-old. The New York Times is treating their audience this way.
Yeah.
And I'm going to read a quote from there's actually several books of yours that come into my mind as soon as I get around this new flap of them shooting down these objects. One of them is in Covert Wars and the Clash of Civilization, which I say when you published it 2015, 2016, it's talking about now.
I
That's
know.
what's so interesting to me. So I think we're catching up to this book that you did. Here's the quote. 1953 was a significant year. According to Hall's report, that was the year the Air Force issued Regulation 200-2, which restricted public discussion of UFOs by Air Force personnel. 1953 was, of course, also the year of the famous Kinross case, where on November 23rd, an Air Force F-89 jet, with its pilot, Lieutenant Moncia, disappeared chasing a UFO over Lake Superior. It's interesting because we just had Lake Huron in this. It will be recalled that Moncla's aircraft radar return merged with that of the UFO, and after that, neither plane pilot nor its radar man were ever seen again. And finally, no debris, no bodies, no nothing. December 1st of that year saw the U.S. Air Force making another public admission, namely that it had established a network of flying saucer cameras around the country. These cameras were equipped with different gratings to analyze the nature of UFO light sources. That was 1953.
So much for domain unawareness.
Right. I mean, and it's all there. Interesting. What they're saying now is there's no debris from the 3 incidents. They have the debris from the main balloon.
Right.
And we have Lake Huron is the one where it got shot down. It's Lake Superior here.
Right.
I mean, this is a lot of crossover. And then they're saying, look, we've got these flying saucer cameras all over the nation at these installations. And now we have VanHerck saying in 2023, well, we have domain awareness gap because we didn't have the sensors to look at anything that was in the space. We're just NORAD. We sit here and drink coffee, I guess.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden we turn the dial and now our sensors work again. The
Right.
sensors that we didn't have that created the domain awareness problem. Yeah.
Right. There was a problem, but it's all set.
It's all set now. Yeah.
Joseph,
That-
what is that reflection back to 53, 70 years ago? And this, disappearance incident, the Air Force saying, don't talk about that anymore to personnel. And then finally, this last piece. What is it that it's telling us in reflection in a mirror back 70 years?
It could be telling us one of two things, perhaps both. Number one, the Air Force has not changed its playbook. The government has not changed its playbook. It's still handling these incidents in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, it tells us that whoever's behind these events, assuming them not to be made up, as I certainly don't think the Kinross case was made up,
Mm-hmm.
it tells us that whoever's behind them have not changed their playbook. In other words, we're dealing with a pattern that is repeated for whatever reason. And that pattern, if you look at the Kinross case, is hard reconnaissance.
Right.
If you look at it from a purely military point of view, that's what it is. You're going out and you're stealing a piece of equipment of a potential enemy so that you can dissect it and see what they're capable of.
Mm-hmm.
Now, nations have been doing this all the time ever since warfare began.
Right.
What's the secret of that steel sword? What's in that Russian or German or American tank? And on it goes. Clint Eastwood made a movie about stealing an advanced Russian airplane. On and on it goes.
Right.
So the pattern here suggests to me that somebody wants to know the actual capabilities of the United States Air Force. And if you do that, you're going to want to keep up with it. A 1950s F-89 Sabre fighter jet is going to be quite a bit different in terms of its technology than a modern day F-16 or F-22 or what have you, and on and on it goes. So you're going to be tracking the technological development. Or it could be both. In other words, we're looking at a pattern of behavior from whomever. We're looking at a pattern of behavior on the part of the American military and security apparatus in response to it. And both patterns have not changed significantly because the military purpose behind each is rather the same.
Interesting. Right. Let's take a look at China's role in all this. Do you think it's possible, since it's their balloon that started this shoot down craze,
Uh-huh.
do you think it's possible that they're participating with us in this drill?
Oh, very easily. Yeah. Number one, the influence of communist China inside this country is off the charts.
Mm-hmm.
You just look at the Biden family itself.
Oh my God.
Look at the Bush family. Look at the Clinton. Their influence in this country is extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
Would they be privy and part of an operation like this? Yes. If there was a genuinely international component to whatever's going on, and it was necessary to keep the Chinese as another great power informed about it.
Mm-hmm.
So certainly I can see that. If they are providing platforms and technology for it, certainly. What mystifies me about the whole Chinese balloon thing is if you're launching a weather balloon and it goes off course and stays up in the air, the normal thing to do is to notify the potentially affected countries.
Sure.
This is where I balk at the story, because number one, I can't see the Chinese wanting to carry out a covert or espionage purpose with balloons. I just can't wrap my mind around that. They've got satellites. They've got a human intelligence network on the ground. Think of every Chinese restaurant that you visit as a potential cell in a human intelligence network. I mean,
Mhm.
that's the way you have to think.
Wow.
That means that they have an enormous capability, potential capability for just on the ground human intelligence.
Right.
Period. Pure and simple. So a balloon strikes me as the least viable and stable and worthy platform on which to conduct surveillance or electronic intelligence gathering or what have you. The Chinese have much more sophisticated and stable platforms to do this. So the balloon aspect bothers me from that standpoint. And if it was a weather balloon, as the Chinese are saying it was, and that its purpose was entirely benign, then why were no warnings provided to Canada and the United States about, hey, we've lost control of this thing. It's on such and such a track. Here's the alerts that you need to give your civilian airlines. Now, maybe China did it and we simply covered it up. Who knows? But
Right.
there's no aspect of this story, Daniel, no aspect of this story that makes any sense along the lines that they're trying to spin it. And
Right.
that applies to the US government and that applies to the communist Chinese government. Neither side, neither side's explanation here makes sense to me.
It's weird,
Yes.
actually. Yeah. The Chinese part and their objections after it was shot down are weird complicity and letting it go. Just, hey, it's going wandering across the US and we're watching it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, come
Exactly.
on.
Exactly. And,
These are nuclear nations.
these are nuclear nations. I saw one of the explanations out there that I saw for the Chinese balloon thing was this was the perfect way to set off a small tactical nuke and create an electromagnetic pulse.
Right.
Well, for crying out loud, if the Chinese wanted to do that, they're going to put their bomb on something that they can steer.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
it's just
And they've
oh
been doing this, they've sent up things in the air for
of
years that have never gone over the US.
of course they have.
Yeah.
We send up weather balloons all the time.
Yes. They've got
You
all the
know,
expertise in the world, and the idea that they'd make a mistake like that and then not even, talk to our national security people as tense as things are
yeah,
supposedly.
no,
No way.
no.
So they're in on it.
At some level, they're in on it, and this is what frustrates me, Daniel, is that no, here the two of us are talking about this, and we've both got minds, and we can both read the news, and we can both reason out these things, and no one is thinking in these terms. Turn turn the clock back 50 years, and you tell me that Walter Cronkite would have swallowed this whopper.
Yeah.
No, he would
Yeah.
have been glasses would have been off, and the voice would have been there, and from this reporter's view, there's something wrong with this. There would
Yeah.
have been at least an acknowledgement that the
Even back
story.
then.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. That the story stinks. You know, have we come this far as a people that we are this stupid?
Wow.
That's all I can take away from this. Are we really that stupid?
Right. Right. It's an intelligence test on some
Yes.
level.
Yeah, it is. It
Yeah.
really is.
Um, there's something else about the Chinese reaction that bothers me. In the
Mhm.
middle of their reaction, where they said, "We maintain the right to defend, whatever we have in airspace,"
Sure.
and then they talk tough for like 24 hours, and then they come up with their own report that, "Hey, we shot something down too."
I know.
And then, there were little reports like, "Oh, the U.S. just escorted 4 Alaskan, Russian jets over Alaska out of there." And
Mhm.
so now it's like, oh, and then, oh, there's a huge meteor display going on in Europe, so it's like all this sky activity, but it's this balloon. It's this weird story that kicks everything off.
Uh-huh.
And, this idea when that was going on, I was like, they're letting this thing wander across Missouri and just like, hey, I'm checking out your nuclear sites and, sending the data back in real time. So just very strange, almost surreal.
Yeah, the whole thing is surreal. We're concerned that the Chinese are using a balloon to spy on us and gather up all sorts of electronic data as it slowly floats across the country.
Mhm.
Okay. Where are the stories being reported that we jammed the signal? Again, this balloon has to send a signal to some satellite, Chinese satellite up there, or it has a shortwave radio on it, who knows?
Yeah.
But there's got to be some mechanism to get whatever intelligence is on this balloon back to China, and that's going to require communication of some sort, either a satellite link or shortwave or something. So here's my question: what did they do to jam the signal?
Great point. Nothing has even been said about that.
Nothing has been said about it. So you're telling me that we don't have the technology to jam signals on a Chinese weather balloon?
I mean, it's so beyond absurd.
It is totally beyond absurd. And then we
Um,
shoot it down when it's finally over through the continental United States, when it's had time to send all of that intelligence from Facebook and Twitter over to Beijing, where they're eagerly, it's like a Hollywood B movie, and you've got Klaus Schwab, Baron von Bombburst there, rubbing his hands together. It's just nuts.
He's
Nothing
talking
about
about whoever gets the master of this technology will be master of the world.
of the world. Yeah, yeah.
This guy. It is somebody who's scripting this. Joseph, this is interesting to me. Another signature in the middle of all this.
Yeah,
Montana.
I know.
What is it? Now, I'm going to tell you, from my perspective, there's two weird things that I know about Montana. One, Casey predicted in his readings that one day it was going to feed the world.
Okay.
Livingston, Montana.
Okay.
Which is, one of those things that's just out there.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is that we had the Malmstrom Air Force Base nuclear incident in 1967.
Yes.
And also that the cousin of this Helene Cooper, who was the New York Times columnist who did the whole Elizondo story,
Mm-hmm.
he's the mayor of Helena, Montana.
Mm-hmm.
And in Helena, Montana, when he became mayor, they started all of these ET programs, ET education programs in the colleges.
Mm-hmm.
So now the balloon was spotted by civilians in Montana. But when the Air Force said it was in Missouri, there were people taking live pictures and sending them into networks, and they were seeing sky flashes.
Right.
And this actually made it onto Fox News when the governor of Montana was being interviewed, and they said, "What do you think of this?" And he was like, "I can't comment on it now, but yeah, it's interesting." So that wasn't the balloon.
Well, there was a picture taken in Billings,
Yes.
supposedly of the balloon being shot down.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And lest people forget, Billings is the largest city in Montana.
Mm-hmm.
So this is not a small area. You've got a lot of people there, and somebody saw it.
Mm-hmm.
Unless here's another Montana connection for you. Star Trek, the Next Generation movie.
Right.
Where does the first human warp flight take off from in the movie?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Montana.
What is going on there?
Daniel, I don't know.
Yeah.
I honestly don't know. Something weird is going on there. Why? Well, apparently there's some sort of Montana mystique. I don't know. Daniel, I'm drawing a blank, but I will agree with you that there's something about Montana that has these people vexed or something. I don't know. I don't know what it is.
This is interesting, because let's take Malmstrom as one of the keys for this. Obviously, the balloon could have been surveilling it. This could have been one of the stories they were playing with. But it also, we know that Chance Salzman, the space commander of Space Force, that was his beat. He was there for a decade. And so he has his UFO signature, and VanHerck has his UFO signature. Chance Salzman, having been there, he wasn't there during, of course, the incident in 67. That's too far back from him. But again, it's generational for these places. That incident, though, includes the fact that the UFO did what? It shut off the entire missile silos. So that's a signature too. That's one of the warnings, as it were. We can shut this stuff down.
There's and it was the Malmstrom incident, I believe, that prompted, according to Richard Hastings' research, that prompted the Air Force to hire Boeing to see what happened. And Boeing was able, here's the key, according to Hastings, Boeing was able to reproduce the effect of the UFO. So in other words, okay, so that means that Boeing Incorporated has the ability to shut down America's land-based nuclear missile ICBM flights. That's a big wow. And just to sweeten the Montana pot a bit more, let's remember that Malmstrom, if I remember, is kind of over there in western Montana, close to Helena and places like that. Let's remember that those air bases during World War II were key air bases on the airlifted American Lend-Lease to the Soviet Union on their flights to Alaska and then across to Siberia. It was those bases in Montana precisely that were the jumping off points. In fact, that air base in particular, if I remember correctly, was the base that Major Jordan Racy was stationed at, where he found, the yellow cake and other documents concerning the transshipment of atomic secrets to the Soviet Union. So there's something going on in Montana about all this.
Fascinating.
And it raises the question, is Montana being used as a place for the transshipment of advanced technology from here to off-world, or vice versa? Who knows? I don't. There is a Montana connection.
Yes. It makes sense that it would be a portal of some exchange.
Right.
The way that they're treating it. That's interesting what you said there also, because that goes back to some deep research you did upon these transcripts coming out relating to the Roosevelt administration.
Yeah.
And this testimony by someone in the Roosevelt administration saying, hey, he was trying to get this uranium over to the Russians.
That was Major Jordan. That was
That's
Major
him.
Jordan to the House Un-American Activities Committee.
Unbelievable.
Well, guess who's on that committee when he's testifying? Senator Carl Munt.
Oh, yes.
Representative from my home state that later goes on to become senator.
Right.
And then chairman of the Army McCarthy hearings. And Richard Nixon.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, oftentimes they're sitting right next to each other as they're grilling Alger Hiss or whoever's in front of this committee.
Wow.
So, there's yet another connection here going on, that these people are tapping into something, and it's getting somebody awfully nervous. I mean, just look what they did to shut down McCarthy.
Yeah.
All he has to do is mention New Mexico and those particular dates during the Fort Monmouth investigation, and the next thing you know, he's embroiled in this huge scandal with the U.S. Army, and they're going out of their way on national TV to get rid of this guy and his sidecook, Roy Cohn.
They're going to get rid of him. Yeah.
So something's
That's a bridge too far.
It's a bridge too far, and again, it's UFO related.
And you've brought forward that McCarthy, in those hearings with Cohn, is pressing the Army on Project Blue Book.
Oh, yeah. Project Blue Book comes up. Top secret documents that are not logged in are disappearing. And, McCarthy is constantly trying to, where are these documents? Who had missing documents again?
Right.
Okay. We've got.
Oh, my God. It's like deja vu.
It's like deja vu.
Yeah.
And he's trying to get an honest answer, and the military doesn't have one for him. Then he repeatedly mentions July and New Mexico to these Fort Monmouth radar experts, and finally gets them to admit, yeah, we were out there, with our equipment during the Roswell incident.
Mm-hmm.
And let's remember, these hearings are taking place when? In 1952. So you tell me that Joseph McCarthy, U.S. Senator from Wisconsin, is not thinking of the UFO flat.
Right. The flyover in D.C.
The flyover, yeah. And on top of this, he's become aware of some shenanigans, financial shenanigans with the occupation currency plates. On and on, on and on this goes.
Yeah.
And the common thread there again is what? It's UFOs.
Yes.
And a lot of money.
Interesting.
You gotta wonder. And classified documents that no one can account for.
Wow, incredible. You're so great at identifying this other player, this other actor on the world stage in major deep events like 9/11. And, it's interesting to me that it came up when we were doing this whole thing about Promise Software last fall.
Right.
And we seem to get kind of a little more hint of that other player. One of the things that you did in a book that was largely about 9/11, but the title was Hidden Finance, Rogue Networks, and Secret Sorcery.
Uh-huh.
Very interesting book, and I think really loaded with possibilities right now. For some reason, my mind went immediately to it when this stuff was happening.
Uh-huh.
Because of something that you followed up on in there relating to this other group. And it was all about the bad insider
Uh-huh.
drill that took place on 9/11 regarding this whole Guardian drill that was being run.
Mhm.
And what caught my eye, Joseph, was that the NRO was somehow involved in this.
Yes. If I remember correctly, you're talking, and you're going to have to refresh my memory more deeply. Are you talking about the phone calls, the mysterious phone calls to the White House, and the knowledge of the codes? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Yeah. During and this research really came out with Webster Tarpley.
Right.
He was the one that, to my memory, I think was the one that uncovered these connections. At some point, if you block out, and I'm going to try and do this for people in a kind of quick overview fashion, but if you block out the timeline of 9/11 with as much exactitude as you can, you begin to notice some very peculiar behavior, because and this is basically Webster Tarpley's reconstruction. When Bush the Stupid is sitting in the elementary school reading My Pet Goat, and also no occult symbolism there, folks.
Yeah, right.
but and he's informed by Andrew Card that there's an attack, and you see him kind of look, and then he goes back to reading the book. So in other words, okay, it's begun. Continue. And then you get Ari Fleischer apparently holding up the sign at a certain point as he's there with the children, say nothing. Okay. Then Bush has that little press conference at the school where he says he's going to have to cut his visit short. He's enjoyed it, blah, blah, blah. And he's got to get back to Washington.
Right.
Then he gets in the motorcade and they make a beeline for Air Force One. Air Force One does the unthinkable under these circumstances. It takes off without escort. The pilot puts that plane on the tail and climbs at an extremely fast rate. And somewhere between the school and Air Force One, because Air Force One begins immediately as it takes off from Sarasota to go to Barksdale.
Mm-hmm. That's so weird.
Yeah. Somewhere in that short period of time, Tarpley believes the White House received its phone call from somebody that indicated they possessed code names, not only for Air Force One, not only for the president, and so on and so forth, but all sorts of other code names that indicated to the people at the White House that the penetration was deep and someone else had control of the U.S. nuclear arsenal. And that Bush, accordingly, had to go to Barksdale, which is the second backup nuclear command. He ditches the reporters along with him on Air Force One at Barksdale, gives that speech where he said nothing about terrorism. This is key. Nothing about terrorism, but was talking about America is under attack and it's a test. And from Barksdale, after he gets rid of the reporters, makes his brief remarks, he flies on to Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, which is the headquarters for America's nuclear forces.
And he looks freaked out in that press conference.
And he looks freaked out. In the meantime, Dick Cheney supposedly is bundled by the Secret Service, captured or, got a hold of in the White House, and taken immediately to the White House Situations Room, where supposedly he's running things. Now, the question that has always been raised is Cheney himself under duress as he's issuing all these orders, which include shoot-down orders?
Wow.
Okay. And then, as the pièce de résistance, we're told that at some point, Bush is on the telephone to Vladimir Putin, who's the only foreign leader that is contacted by the president on that day.
Wow.
And supposedly, Bush is telling Putin, we're going into Afghanistan, don't do anything. I suspect, as does Webster Tarpley, that the real reason for the phone call is we have somehow lost control of our nuclear forces.
Wow.
That's what I suspect is going on. Now, let's bring this up to date and tie it in with what's going on here with this Chinese balloon.
Right.
Here comes a balloon. I have a vision of the Chinese sending a balloon, and it's got a fish hook underneath it, a big fish hook. and the fish hook has a manila envelope on it, which is full of cash.
It's headed for the White House.
Yeah, to Joe from Xi, to the big guy. Here's your money. But the Chinese do have a sense of humor, folks. Let's not forget that. But anyway, I suspect that it's something to do with the nuclear chain of command, because what have we seen recently? Well, on the day of the so-called insurrection,
right?
What's Pelosi talking about? Well, immediately after the election, she was talking, we need a committee to manage the nuclear football.
This was weird because a Democrat was taking over.
So, at the time, it was being sold as she's worried about Trump and the nuclear football.
Right.
But then this was repeated, this call for a committee to run the football was repeated after Biden took over. And under the circumstances, I don't blame them because I don't want that guy anywhere close to a red button. For once, I agree. I don't want him anywhere near the red button. He'll think it's an ice cream treat or something absurd. But we've had this talk about who's controlling the nuclear football, and that's the question.
Yeah,
who really does have control of it?
It's very, very interesting, and it's interesting to me because at the end of the Trump administration, a lot of weird things happen. But one of the weird things that happened is that John Brennan, former CIA director for many years under Barack Obama,
Mhm.
flips out trying to get the 25th Amendment called on Trump so that
Right.
he can get out of office even in the two,
Right.
lame duck months where he's on his way out. Anyway, he's already lost the election
Right.
supposedly,
Right.
and he is just going to, be out by January 20th. He's flipping out trying to get him out before that because he doesn't want him to do what?
Well, that's exactly the question. What was he so afraid of?
Mhm.
There were lots of strange things in those final days of the Trump administration that fueled QAnon conspiracy theory after QAnon conspiracy theory.
Yes.
And I'll grant you, Trump signed a lot of weird executive orders during that time,
No
some of
question.
them dealing with the continuity of government.
Yes.
And what that portends, I don't know. Um, the thing that I do have to question is who does have the actual de facto control of the nuclear football.
Yeah.
Because you'll notice that Putin's remarks have changed very subtly since the Russian military action in the Ukraine.
Mhm.
Because Putin and other people in the Russian government are now openly, and in a way that they have not done before, openly pointing out the existence of a deep state running the West in opposition to the best interests of its own people.
Yes.
This is new.
Yes.
They have not shied from pointing out these interests before, but the tone and in which they're doing it is new. Um, so I have to wonder, is the football story being put out there to confuse potential enemies as to who really is in charge over here? I wouldn't be a bit surprised about that either.
Wow.
Um, because
Yeah.
Biden, I can almost guarantee you, Biden, they would not trust with this. They barely trusted Trump.
Yeah.
And if you turn the clock back, I would imagine that they had similar misgivings with Obama and Bush the stupid.
Mhm.
Um, so something is going on here, and something is being exposed, and the intelligence, and it's got to do with UFOs.
Yeah.
If the nuclear deterrent is in part designed, as I think it was, to deal with that problem,
Mhm.
then yet another message is being sent. So there's some sort of behind all of this theater with the balloons, Daniel. I can't help but also think that there's some sort of interplanetary gunboat diplomacy going on here.
Oh,
It
interesting.
because it has that feel, uh,
Yeah.
Greece is acting out, and so Italy sends a battleship, to, to
Right,
say,
yeah.
watch who you're messing around with here. Something like this is going on.
Well, let's play out your scenario for a minute. Let's
Sure.
think about this. So the balloon, let's say America and China are like, we're going to do this kind of UFO test, and we're going to get
Mhm,
people into looking at the skies, and we're going to
mhm,
sort of position NORAD. You guys position your stuff for this fake UFO threat that we're going to pull coming up.
mhm,
And so
mhm,
they do that, and the balloon is there, and it gets this weird attention. It's already a weird story. But then
mhm,
after that, shoot down of other objects.
mhm.
Let's just suppose for a minute, because all of the debris disappeared, that the other objects weren't part of the plan, and that a
Okay.
third actor, that other actor that you talk about, the bad insider,
Uh-huh.
gets a hold of the machinery.
I would not be a bit surprised.
Yeah.
It has that same three-leveled feel to it
Yes. As
that
9/11.
as 9/11, and particularly this business about not being able, or in my thinking, really not willing to identify whoever this third player is and whatever these objects are.
Right.
Assuming that they're telling the truth, that there is somebody out there besides China sending these, whatever they are, over the United States. Assuming that to be true, then that is by admission that you've got a player that has a technology and that owns these things that they have ultimately no idea. Now, I suspect that they have a suspicion who the third player is, just as they did on 9/11, and that phone call to the White House was the tip-off. We have all of this information. And we know that the Russians know that there is such a third player because prior to 9/11, in July of that year, Dr. Tatiana Koryagina, a Russian economist, wrote a little op-ed piece that was carried in TASS on the Russian news service, where she said that the West was going to, within the next few months, be attacked, and America would be attacked on its own soil by a cabal, her words, that represented a group with assets in excess of $300 trillion.
Incredible.
So in other words, we have a Russian economist on record in TASS saying there's an international group, a non-territorial state, that's doing all of this. And if they're doing all of this, they have access to the technology to pull it off.
Amazing. Wow.
So I'm not a bit surprised that they could be doing the same thing here. That you have some sort of drill, and then a presence within that drill is announced. And the deep state is wrong-footed as a result of it. And that wrong footing indicates something else. That wrong footing indicates that they have moles within the deep state. So if you're wondering why the American government isn't behaving like the American government, one reason, in my opinion, is that many of its agencies and organs and institutions are indeed penetrated. And I'm not talking about just the Chinese.
Right.
Right.
They're being penetrated by the Chinese and something else.
And something else. Yeah. There's a non-state, I go back to my Nazi International thesis. There's a non-state actor on the world stage, and its basic philosophy or cosmology, if you will, is materialist and fascist.
Right.
That's
right. Well, let's put the NRO thing out there. One of the codes that were penetrated during that 9/11 period was the National Reconnaissance Office.
Yes.
Which you pointed out and really caught my eye when I went back to read this. Now, the NRO was actually a secret organization introduced by President Eisenhower just before Kennedy got in. I wonder if it wasn't a favor in a sense. I'm going to give you this so you can keep an eye on things. That they managed until 1973 to be completely unknown to anyone outside of the national security environment.
Right.
And then their programs managed to stay secret until 1995 with the Corona satellites and all that photography and all the things that we were doing. If we had an organization inside the government, an NRO-2, that was completely unknown to the public, but was engaged in kind of monitoring the UFO file aspect, and that they were building, based on this, a false UFO threat. They could use this NRO-2, and since we've seen it penetrated in 2001, the NRO codes, that is, the second group could have been penetrated recently with what we just saw.
Sure. And there's a reason why you would do this, especially with the UFO issue. It's a classic information warfare operation that you're seeing, because if you suspect that there's someone out there, and I don't care who the someone is, Nazis, ETs, who names it, or Nazi ETs, Who knows?
Right.
If you suspect that there's someone out there with an advanced technological capability that is better than your own, and that you have a kind of nascent capability of your own, what do? Well, the first thing you do is you obfuscate their capability so badly that their decision-making processes are clotted at every turn. So in other words, you are deliberately creating confusion about their capability so that they themselves are wondering if it is as capable as they think. It's a strategy of confusion and tension that you would absolutely follow if you're in the weaker position. And if you notice, the Soviet Union all throughout the Cold War was pursuing precisely such a strategy in its disinformation and propaganda campaign vis-a-vis the West. It was doing precisely all of this stuff as part of its disinformation warfare. So I'm not surprised that the NRO is involved in this, because in a certain sense, you're creating the NRO to be the propaganda office disseminating these views to the potential enemy. And the higher up and the more classified status it has, the better the source of information is going to be perceived to be by a potential enemy. So you bet we're in a war, Daniel, like it or not. We're in a war.
Interesting. Wow. That's fascinating too, because a lot of this NRO activity could be to give the Russians a false impression of what is happening with UFO activity,
Absolutely.
letting them dime into our phone call.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, this has dimensions for geopolitics and any exopolitics as may be going on. Yeah, absolutely it does. You're in a war.
Joseph, unbelievable information and deep insight. Stay right there, and we'll do another hour or more for part 2 with a closer look at COG and the UFO file threat narrative. Dark Journalist members will get this episode in their inbox this weekend from darkjournalist.com. For more of Joseph's incredible work, please visit gizadeathstar.com. And we'll be live tomorrow, that's Saturday night, with a special report on all this, 8 p.m. Eastern. See you soon.